Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Diane, for that very kind and warm welcome. We have been friends for quite a number of years, and it's always really wonderful to see you. And I'd also like to just point out that I'm not sure where he is. My colleague, Jeff Urich, the member from Elgin, Middlesex, London, is here. Thank you very much for your support, Jeff. And Chris Robson also as well, who is our candidate for London Fanshawe in the last campaign, is also here. I really respect my colleagues very much, and I'm very, very happy that they're involved with my team. But it's always great to be back here in London. As some of you may know, I graduated from law school in London more years ago, longer ago than I care to think about. But I also have my son Quinn is going to the Ivy Business School, and my sister Laura Elliott is the Director of Education for the Thames Valley School Board. So I have many connections and used to work with your new mayor. So it's wonderful. I have many connections that keep bringing me back to London. It's always a pleasure to visit. And it's a particular honor to be asked to join you today here at the Canadian Club of London. I know that the club's rich history and deep devotion to stimulating discussions about our country and our vision for our country is something that I really admire. But today I'd like to speak to you briefly, and I won't go on too long because I know you have to go back to work, but I'd like to speak to you briefly about my vision for Ontario, and by talking about Ontario's future and more importantly your ideas, I think that together we're going to be able to build our economy and make Ontario once again the powerhouse of our country. Discussions like these, of course, are so important as we face so many economic and social challenges here in the province of Ontario. My vision for Ontario is rooted in the values that I grew up with: fiscal responsibility, volunteerism, and compassion for those who are vulnerable. Some of you, and I know there's a Whitby contingent here today, some people here would have known my parents. My father was a popular teacher and coach at high school, and he knew everyone in the community. I think he was way more popular than I was. But he was a great mentor to a lot of young people, and even now when I go canvassing from election after election, I run into people who my father had an impact on. And they invite me into their homes and show me old photos that they have. And to me, it's really wonderful to know that he had such an impact on so many people. My mother was also active in a variety of groups, and I guess you could say that my mother was a consummate volunteer. She was involved in the church, she was involved in the Canadian Cancer Society, Heart and Stroke Foundation, our local mental health hospital, and also blood donor clinics when they were run by volunteers. But both of my parents emphasized the importance of being a part of the community, of contributing back, and helping those people who needed our help, who needed a bit of a leg up. These are the values that have guided me both in my personal and professional career, and were actually the driving force getting me to enter politics in the first place in 2006. Many people thought that I ran because I ran to replace my husband Jim, who decided to leave provincial politics and run federally. Many people thought that I wanted to run just to replace him. Well, it was much more than that. It was really because as a volunteer, I saw many gaps in our system, and I wanted to be able to be an advocate for people who are vulnerable and to make their lives better. These are the people that don't grab headlines in a newspaper. They're not sexy topics, but they're things that really need to be done. People with special needs, people with developmental disabilities, people who are facing mental illness. These are people who face barriers but have the same wants and desires that we all have: an opportunity to work, to contribute to their community, and to lead happy and productive lives. So when I'm thinking about planning for Ontario's future, these are the people that I think about. How do we create opportunities for our most vulnerable citizens? How do we ensure that our children have the same opportunities that we had growing up? How can we make Ontario the prosperous and dynamic province that it was and can be again? When I think about these questions, and I think about the people that rely on us to make good decisions, it's clear to me that government needs to reset its priorities. We need to start making decisions based on our shared values, that you spend within your means, you help people who can't help themselves, you give every Ontarian the opportunity to live a life of dignity and purpose, and everything government does should be based on those values. This, I believe, is where the future of Ontario lies. in priorities driven by our shared values. And I want to see these priorities start to truly drive the policies put forward by government. Yet, when I look at the state of Ontario's economy today, I see a complete abdication of our responsibility to the next generation. Today, at $12.5 billion, Ontario's deficit is larger than 3/4 of all the other provinces' deficits combined. This week, I'm sure many of you read about the Auditor General's report. The Auditor General reported that the debt of Ontario was going to rise to $325 billion by 2018. That means a debt of $23,000 is going to be attached to every child that's born that year. I don't know about you, but to me, that number is completely unacceptable, and I think we all feel the same way. Fiscal irresponsibility handicaps the potential of our children and risks the prosperity of an entire generation. To me, of course, as a progressive conservative, fiscal responsibility is the bedrock of everything we do. In order to achieve the priorities of prosperity and opportunity, government needs to be responsible with its finances. If we don't control spending today, we can't act in a meaningful way with respect to the priorities of tomorrow. In eliminating our deficit and putting our spending under control and controlling our debt, we're able to ensure our next generation gets the opportunities it deserves. Now, many experts have suggested, people more knowledgeable than I am, including the eminent historian Niall Ferguson. I don't know if you've read his new book, The New Degeneration. He suggests that by taking on unprecedented levels of debt, we're breaking the moral contract between the generations. As a result of our generation's decisions, we're leaving our children and our grandchildren with no choice except to cut spending sharply and reduce the programs and services we've come to need and rely upon, or to sharply increase taxes. To me, that's neither compassionate nor responsible, and we need to deal with it now. We also need to start a more vigorous discussion on what the economy of the future is going to look like for our young people. And I can tell you, as a parent of 3 23-year-olds, that's on my mind a lot. I hear about it a lot from not only my sons, but their friends. There's a deep anxiety about where are they going to find jobs and are they going to be able to stay in Ontario. Right now, as many of you know, we have a situation where we have jobs without people and people without jobs. Ontario employers are looking to Western European countries and elsewhere to find the skilled workers that we need, while we have a youth unemployment rate approaching 20% in many parts of our province. We need to recognize that discrepancy, and we need to also recognize the role that innovation has to play in modernizing Ontario's economy and correcting this imbalance. In Whitby-Oshawa, where I grew up, we had a total reliance for many, many years on the auto manufacturing industry, such that about 20 years ago, we had over 10,000 people involved in manufacturing. Today, that workforce has shrunk to about 3,000. My grandfather worked on the line at General Motors, and many of my colleagues did too. Many of them are retired now with quite nice pensions, actually, but that's not the reality for the young people of today. I know that's happening in towns and cities across Ontario, and I know you've been particularly hard hit here in London with manufacturing losses, but it also means that we have to be more innovative in what we bring to Ontario in the future. For me, the answer is what do we do in an innovative way to do that, to lessen our reliance on manufacturing, which isn't to say that manufacturing won't continue to have a place in Ontario. Absolutely it will, and we want to create the conditions for that to come back, but we simply need to look at higher level manufacturing. Governments also need, though, to start working with employers, post-secondary institutions, as well as students, to provide the knowledge and skills necessary to create the jobs that employers need to fill and that young people need to find in order to be able to continue to stay in Ontario. This means, to me, placing an emphasis on entrepreneurism in our schools and allowing our next generation to graduate both with a degree or diploma on the one hand and a business idea on the other hand. We see that happening in other jurisdictions. I think if you look at Israel as an example, startup nation, you know what they're doing. We can also replicate that here in Ontario. But we also need to look at the business environment that our students are graduating into. It's great that they have great ideas and the great businesses that they want to start, but we need to take a look at what the rules are, what's the ground looking like for businesses to stay here in Ontario. Having the second highest industrial rate in North America for energy certainly doesn't help things. We need to create a comprehensive energy program in Ontario. We also need to keep corporate taxes down. We need to reduce red tape and regulation. All of those things need to happen to make sure that businesses can thrive and grow in Ontario. So that's as far as business is concerned. I don't think it's rocket science, but we need to make a few basic changes in order to be able to allow those businesses to come here. And right now I feel confident that given what's happening in other provinces of Canada, it's not enough for our government to sit back and say, well, the worldwide recession is happening. It's beyond our control. There's nothing much more we can do about it. When you look at how well Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC are doing, they're doing some things right that we're not doing here in Ontario. So we need to make sure that we change those conditions so that businesses will come here in the first place, the businesses that we're going to grow here and that young people are going to create are going to be able to thrive. Switching topics slightly, as critic for health and long-term care for much of the last 4 years, I would be remiss if I didn't say a few words about the future of health care in Ontario. And if any field of business could benefit from a clear mandate of priorities and a culture of innovation, it's certainly healthcare. The Auditor General's report that Diane was mentioning that was released earlier this week contains some really startling statistics showing the government's failure, in my view, to prioritize spending and services. In the area of palliative care, for example, end-of-life services, there is, according to the Auditor General, no strategic framework or oversight in place for the delivery of this essential healthcare service. In the area of residential services for people with developmental disabilities, the numbers are equally stunning. From 2009 to 2014, the number of people waiting for adult residential services increased 50%, while the numbers served increased to only 1%. At that rate, it would take 22 years to place anyone who is currently waiting for residential services. 22 years. I've heard in my riding, and I'm sure Jeff and Chris heard it also on the campaign trail, from parents who are stressed to the max. They're terribly worried about what's going to happen to their son and daughter when they're no longer there to take care of them. To have to think about waiting for 22 years for your child to get services. We're seeing families now who are dropping off their adult sons and daughters because they're not able to care for them anymore. That's not the kind of Ontario I want to live in. That's a priority. These are the people that we need to take care of. We need to change. We can't keep increasing our healthcare budget, for example, by 6 to 8% per year. It's simply unattainable and crowds out our ability to provide essential services in areas like education, infrastructure, and justice services. So we're simply not getting good value for our dollar. Study after study, and I've read a lot of international studies that consistently place Canada, Ontario being included in the last place in bang for the buck category. We're not getting value for the healthcare dollars that we have, so we need to look at things differently. So how do we deal with these challenges? Well, there's only 3 ways that we can deal with it as far as I'm concerned. You can raise taxes. Nobody wants to do that. You can cut services. We absolutely can't do that at a time where we have an aging baby boomer population, present company included. But we can also innovate, and I think innovation is the only way for us to achieve the kinds of efficiencies and better healthcare services that we need in the province of Ontario. The good news is when you innovate, when you start focusing on what the patient truly needs, you generally get better value for the services that you provide. I'd like to just provide you with a couple of examples of the kind of innovation that I'm talking about. One thing that I believe we need to do is to transition from an outdated model of healthcare delivery that is reactive, that's based on acute episodes of illness, and only reacts when people are in crisis. We need to transition to a more modern model of healthcare, one that's proactive, one that focuses on disease prevention, health promotion, and responds to the greatest healthcare challenge of our time, which is no longer acute care, but chronic disease management, which of course goes along with an aging population. We also need to start looking at healthcare as a job creator rather than just as a consumer of tax dollars. You know, cutting-edge research is being conducted in our universities and hospitals, including here in London. Some of the work is world-renowned, including some extraordinary brain research, but we're certainly not reaping the benefits of that research. We still have a real disconnect between the research that's being done and the great businesses that could come out as a result of that research. We're not commercializing that research, and as a result, the businesses are going to other jurisdictions. We're losing that. We're losing that huge economic potential that takes advantage of our well-educated workforce and the research that we're doing here. We can and must fix this problem so that businesses receive the assistance they need in order to grow and thrive in Ontario. And I'm not talking about subsidization, I'm not talking about winners and losers, but I am talking about working with government to make it easier for businesses to do business with government by having, for example, one portal that businesses go through rather than having to farm it out to 4 or 5 or 6 different ministries. It takes a lot of time, it's very expensive, and many businesses just throw up their hands and go to another jurisdiction where it's easier. We need to make our government more customer service friendly, and we need to help connect those businesses with private sector investors to help them get off the ground and create the jobs that we need in the future. So those are just a few ideas. I know I've gone on almost as long as it seems, but what I really want to do is hear from all of you. You're the ones that are on the front lines in this economy. You're the ones that are job creators. You see what's going on. You know what works and what doesn't. You're the doers in this economy, as I like to say. You get the job done. So that's why I'm seeking your ideas, your input, your help to make Ontario better. We have the real opportunity now to make Ontario that's a better place to work, a better place to invest and do business, and a better place to live and raise our families. Together, we can offer Ontarians a strong and positive vision for our future. That's why I'm running for leadership, and I believe that when we're working together, we can make Ontario strong again. So I'd like to thank you very much for inviting me to join you today, and I look forward to working together with all of you. Thank you.